Right, well, how many of you guys have an iPhone, an iPad, a tablet, a Droid, or one of those things similar to it here with you now? Now, that's just out of the house. Right now, it's virtually unheard of for somebody not to have a computer at home, let alone away from the house. And I feel like technology has a detrimental effect on people today, more specifically the youth. On a middle school survey conducted by ABC News, 31-3 voted that technology had negative effects. This seemed interesting because it was the kids themselves that voted that it gave them negative effects. And when asked why that was, they said that it led to them procrastinating. They lost a lot of sleep, and they were exposed to things that not all 11 to 13-year-olds should be exposed to. And but there's also evidence that says that technology affects your health in major ways as well. Researchers at the University of California of Los Angeles said in an article in the American Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry that if you are spending a lot of your time talking to people on the internet instead of on the phone or in person, the circuits that control human contact skills will weaken. What happens is that the frontal cortex of your brain doesn't fully develop because it's supposed to develop in your adolescent years. Because what the frontal cortex does is it controls decision making and social skills. And because of the lack of social interaction, people to people, and a certain amount of grace period between your reaction to something and doing something about it, the internet allows for immediate responses, which leads to a lot of hurt feelings because you don't think what you're saying through. This leads into my next supporting evidence, which is cyberbullying. It's one of the more extreme cases of how technology is detrimental to our health, and but it's a huge issue today. Many people become shunned and change schools, and there has been a lot of cases of suicide. I want to tell you about Amanda Todd. She was in 7th grade when she met a man on an internet chat room, and she flashed him. And a year later, he found her on Facebook, and and he told her that either she was to put on a show for him, or he would give the picture out to everybody and virtually release it. She decided not to put on a show for him, and he released it to everybody, all the kids at school, her family, her friends, and because of the internet, he was able to find out all this information about her. He even knew her address. And at school, she got bullied and shunned, and everybody was against her, and she eventually had to change schools, and she became very depressed and developed anxiety attacks, and also had suicidal tendencies. She changed schools twice, and some of the kids from her old school found her, and they beat her up. They ganged up on her and beat her up, and she had to try to drag herself home. But she didn't make it. She ended up collapsing in a ditch on the side of the road, and that's where her father found her. And she ended up going to counseling, but that didn't really help her. She still tried to commit suicide by drinking bleach. And they had her on suicide watch and a lot of other things like that, but eventually she did commit suicide. And this isn't the only example of this happening. It happens to a lot of people. There's a website called, there's a website called Pure Sight that shows a lot of examples of this. People our own age that are doing this, not just middle schoolers and high schoolers. And I feel like this is a big issue in today's world because most of today's world is virtual. It's all online. You know, most people don't go through the day without checking their email or checking the statuses or all of that. And it's something that people should really focus on and be more concerned with. And there's ways to help yourself not use the internet as much as is deemed healthy. And that's by kind of doing things that you haven't gotten done because you didn't have the time or you put it off. And I feel like this is an issue most people should be aware of. And once again, technology does have negative effects, although I'm not saying let's just throw away our phones and everything, because I, like most people, am attached to my phone. But that is what I want to say on the matter. Bless you.
Thank you. Oh, pardon. And I think there's another one in there. It's working its way out. Nope, it's not coming. Didn't help. It's right there. All right. Well, we're missing our evaluator, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started on this. You know, I'm not a big fan of audience surveys, as we've talked about before, but I thought you did okay with this. I actually thought that the other survey that you had at the beginning would have been a better attention device, the one about where they talked to the 31 kids and asked them what they thought, and use that as the attention device. And then maybe at some point you could say, you know, how many of you, for instance, are sitting here with a tablet or a cell phone right now out on the desk, checking in at this very moment, you know, that kind of thing. And then you can kind of make a little joke about it. I think you identify the topic pretty clearly. I know what the general subject is. I'm not quite sure what the specific purpose is. You spent a lot of time, for instance, talking about the cyberbullying thing. And I'm going, okay, well, is there something about that that's going to be the issue? And then other times there's a more general statement about our over-reliance on social media or being connected online and using, for instance, electronic means to communicate, maybe atrophying our ability to communicate. I thought that there was some good information at the start of the speech that needed to be developed more and explained more, because I like that idea. I think that there's an argument to be made that says that people's communication skills will change and be different if they rely on these electronic and virtual means of communication instead of the face-to-face kind of interaction. And you sort of suggest that there's this one piece of information that you talk about on that, but that's about as far as it goes. It gets mentioned, and I think that it needed to be explored a little bit more. And then we're on to
it's hard for me to sound like I'm actually saying this, the more traditional cyberbullying. How long has cyberbullying been a traditional kind of topic? That's a little weird. But yeah, I mean, that's a more straightforward kind of thing. And you're really dependent on the one example because you've got a lot of detail on the example. It creates some trauma and explains some of what you're talking about. But, you know, like I said, it is the one example. You said at one point that there is a lot more that goes on, but I didn't hear any information that proved that there's a lot more that goes on. I guess there's a website that you can go to and see some more information about that. I think you needed to maybe get some of the information off that site and put it into the speech. Organizationally, like I said, I didn't really pick out a preview when you were talking. I couldn't hear an exact structure when you were talking. At the end of the speech, there's not really a summary. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was disorganized or hard to follow, but it does mean that you aren't doing the kinds of things that you want to do to make it easier for your audience to follow things. And so the structural things are the things that we talked about on the very first major presentation, and I think you still need to work on that. So that's something that you need to go back on. On delivery issues, I think you have a couple of things that work really well. You have good audience contact. You're talking to us. You're not shy about looking at people and making a connection, and I think that works really well. You also use your voice pretty effectively. There's good variety there, and you sound natural while you're speaking. The place where there is a little bit of a problem are your other nonverbals. You have a tendency to, your posture is a little uncertain. You're crossing your legs. You look a little like you don't know exactly how you should be standing. You don't look in control. If I'm just listening to you and I'm watching you from the head up, you're in pretty good shape. But your whole body is up there, and that's where all that anxiety kind of stuff comes out, and you just don't look quite the same way. You're not coming across quite the same way. You laugh like you know what I'm talking about. You understand. So I'm not just having some, you know, fantasy about craziness up here. And not craziness, but, you know, that uncertainty. You see that too.
Okay.
Fair enough.